this is Sarah Russell, and I am talking about forward bends and back bends today, our foundational postures in our 200-hour yoga teacher training. So if you want to join me on your mat, you can use some props if you want to. We've got blocks, bolsters, blankets, and a strap. And we are going to start on the mat in looking at our forward folds. We're going to start, actually not seated, sorry. We're going to start a standing straddle forward bend. Prasarita Padasana. And so you can have a block nearby. So what I want you to recognize is that this pose comes from a Warrior II foundation. My feet are facing forward and I'm kind of slightly pigeon toeing the feet in. So if you think about it, I'm in Warrior II, come into this pose, toes are slightly pigeon toed. Why are my toes pigeon toed slightly? Well, what I want to make sure is if my toes are out, I want to be able to bend my knees more like in a goddess pose, which you've probably done in a class where I get that buoyancy. But if my legs are straight, I want them in so that I can support the knees. Okay, so in this position, they're slightly pigeon toed because I'm getting that inner spiral with the thighs again. That's going to give me my nice little J-Lo booty, and I'm going to be able to move and have a little bit more mobility. The legs can be closer if it's more comfortable for people with maybe tighter hip sockets. And then the block, if you choose to use one, is always going to go directly below the sternum. So when you're reaching down, it's going to line up with the shoulders right here, okay? So from this pose, standing forward, fold, straddle, inhale up. Exhale, arms can come to the side or reach to the ground. Trying to keep my shoulders open, that's why I like the arms open. I'm gonna take my hands to the floor. If they don't comfortably come to the floor all the way, go ahead and grab your block and you can place your hands on them. If you've got two blocks, even better because you can place a block underneath both shoulders, right? So from this position, I've got a lot of variations I can do. I personally tend to stay away from anything where I'm reaching through unless I'm really teaching opening the shoulders, because what might happen, you'll see, is as I reach back, I might round the spine here. So this is a very common variation of the posture where somebody's just kind of flopped forward. We want it to stay fully engaged. So think about lengthening the spine, hips are in alignment with the heels here, and think about a down dog with wide legs. So I'm stretching through the spine. And then from there, if I want to walk the hands in, I can. Okay? So that's your straddle. To come out of it, you can heel to the feet a little closer together. Strong back. Inhale, up high. Okay? So that pose is on page 77. And that's a really great posture as you learn and get more comfortable moving around the mat a lot. You can flip it around as much as you want. You can use that pose as kind of a transitional space, forward fold. Maybe you do a twist out of it. Okay. So we've got pyramid pose next, Parshvattanasana. Now pyramid pose comes from Warrior I. So I'm gonna do this forward facing for you. So I'm not gonna be on my tightrope. I'm gonna be on my railroad tracks, right? And this is a really good one to let us know how aligned we are. And I'm constantly readjusting myself in this. So we start in Tadasana and step back into Warrior I. I don't care which side you do, I'm probably gonna switch feet in the middle. As the arms come up, so does that leg as you inhale. You straighten out that front knee. Okay, and my distance, it's just a regular Warrior I distance. I also have the option of kicking that foot slightly further forward, and I would recommend doing that, bringing it a little closer. It's gonna make the posture more comfortable. It's also gonna keep us in alignment a little bit. So hips are facing forward. I like to take the hands to the hips as we come forward when we're learning this. So if you've got new students, we're gonna engage the quad, lift that knee up. As you exhale, slowly pull the heart forward. Maintain that back bend sensation in the upper chest. Okay, now I want you to look at my shoulders. If my hip over here was out of alignment, I'm gonna show you. So I'm gonna just have this hip out of alignment a little bit. Notice that that right shoulder, this shoulder right here, is lower. When I'm in alignment, notice my hips and shoulders are always gonna mirror each other. I get to come down correctly. Okay, so the hands are only going to touch the floor if that is in someone's practice. I recommend encouraging your students to get up on blocks or even just resting the hand on the thigh or the shin. It's really easy to lock out the knee here, so pay special attention to that. Heel is on the ground, it's not lifted. So they get nice and long. We'll see if I'm aligned on both sides. As you exhale, slowly hinge. Pay attention to where the hamstring starts to pull. Breathe. Readjust if you need to, right? Exhale, hinge. Inhale, come up into Warrior I again. Okay, inhale, we open. Another little thing is if you notice yourself getting lightheaded, your chances of the fact that you're probably exhaling when you come up out of the postures, that's probably another reason why you might be getting lightheaded. So that is our pyramid pose. Seated forward bend. So we went through this a little teeny tiny bit Paschimottanasana when we talked about Dandasana. So staff pose is obviously our foundation for this posture. I'm gonna have my strap handy. I'm gonna place it over the arch, I'm sorry, not the arch, the ball of my foot. Okay, so if I've got not a lot of flexibility, this might be what my posture looks like. I come into my Dandasana, nice and strong. Inhale, arms up high. Exhale, begin to fold. I can do the cactus arms if I like, or I can extend. Now, if I can comfortably reach my big toes, I'm gonna go ahead and do that. But if I did it at the expense of rounding my spine, I'm gonna actually walk my hands back a little bit. I like to cross my arms, grab hold of those shins and calf muscles and kind of pull my heart forward. This is where, of course, that strap can come in handy too, where I can use it as leverage to pull. Again, making sure that my shoulders aren't disengaged. Notice there's a rounding sensation. I wanna stay in alignment, ear, shoulder, hip. And then, of course, my legs are automatically in alignment because they've got a boundary, which is the mat. Come out of the pose, we're just gonna inhale up, exhale, hands down, and we're back out of the posture. All right, standing forward bend, Uttanasana. So this is really just a mirror image of the seated posture, only this one can be done incorrectly as well. We do Uttanasana and Ardha Uttanasana in our Surya Namaskar, and most of the time when we're standing into a seated pose, we might even add a chair in there. So I'll do it from the side. We inhale, create the length from Tadasana. Exhale, come into your forward fold with flat back. Now, we are hinging from the hips here. So play with this just for a moment. Okay, find that range of motion in the hips. Okay, you can bend the knees a little bit and find the boundary of the belly touching the thighs. It might be really bent, it might be straight-ish, doesn't matter. So knees can always be bent here, toes are engaged, everything's lighting up from the ground. If you notice your students moving, so say they get this far and then they're reaching, that's the spine moving. It's not hinging at the hips, it's not a forward fold. So we're looking for this sensation, just like they're closing a trunk, all the way down, forward fold. Okay, just come out of the posture, a little buoyancy, so bend in the knees slightly, inhale up, exhale, hands down. Okay, so standing forward bend, that is on page 78. This is one of my favorite postures. We're gonna go into a seated pose, so we're gonna come back down to the floor. And this is coming back to Dandasana. You'll notice Dandasana is really the foundation of all these seated postures. And we're gonna come into, to which pose? To Janu Shirshasana. And this is that head to knee forward bend. So all we're doing is bringing one knee in. So bring that right knee in and then set the sole of that foot to the inner thigh. Now when you did that, make sure that you didn't try to open up, okay? So if this were a standing posture, we'd still be in a warrior one family, okay, ish. We can have a whole conversation about this leg, but for the most part, I am still engaged and facing forward in the same direction that that long leg is. Inhale, reach up. As you exhale, we want the belly button to reach towards the knee, heart reaching towards that foot. Exhale, forward fold. Okay, so we'll have a tendency to maybe come over here, and there's a lot of variations you can do with this posture, but as you fold forward, and I'm gonna go ahead and switch legs right now, so now I'm on my right leg long, left leg in. I want you to pay special attention when you come into this pose and you see your students. It's just like that pyramid posture. The shoulders are gonna come out of alignment if something's not in alignment down below. So we're gonna try to track directly over that leg and hinge and fold right here. Now the neck is a continuation of the spine, so any of these forward folds, if you see your students kind of doing this, where I'm looking at the camera right now, looking at you guys, we're gonna go ahead and ask them to just extend through the length of the neck, okay? So that is your single leg fold. Sometimes this one can be really useful to get a little bit more length out of the hamstrings because one leg is always a little bit tighter than the other and we don't get quite as much of the same stretch. So that's one of my favorite postures. We're gonna do a revolve version of it in the twisting portion. Okay, so open angle, seated straddle. So we've got Upavishta Konasana. This one I tend to always use a prop to lift me up a little bit. And I've been cycling a little bit, so my hips are a little bit tight, so I'm gonna have not the widest angle today. And this is a really good one you can practice at the wall where you're facing the wall and using the wall for leverage against the feet, but legs are gonna come wide. Now you're gonna have a lot more success if you're up and elevated slightly off the mat and you can feel those sit bones rolling forward. Legs stay fully engaged, lift up through the chest. I'll try to get some of this out of the way. Lift up through the chest. Inhale, reach up. Now I teach this posture with the hands coming back behind because it's gonna keep the heart lifted. As you exhale the next breath, keep the feet engaged, inner thighs putting down, toes reaching up. Start to walk the heart forward. Now, I'll do this from the side too so you can see that. In theory. Okay, so if I am in this posture and I use my hands back behind me, notice that I'm keeping the spine in alignment. What tends to happen is our students and ourselves, we will tend to start to round forward because we're trying to get to the floor. So we want to get there first and then walk the hands over. You can also take the hands out nice and wide. So as soon as you feel that curve, make sure that it's the chest that's leading and not the chin or the forehead, and we get into the pose. We're just going to inhale and come up and out of the posture. Okay? So that is our seated straddle, very similar to our standing straddle. And then we've got another favorite, garland or malasana. Your blanket might be helpful. Also, if you are in a studio without props, you can always have your students roll up the back of their mat a little bit. Some studios have wedges, and those are really great too because they're a little wedge to be together. But I find a blanket is really helpful. So if you move into garland pose, we'll come to Tadasana, inhale up high. Step the feet wide, toes turn out. Notice we're getting external rotation. And then we're gonna exhale and drop down. So if you're a little tight, you might wanna rock side to side here. Traditionally, our heels are on the ground right here, okay? So our elbows come forward, the backs of the arms, as if we're gonna go into an arm balance, come into the inner thigh, press the palms into one another. That's gonna lift and lengthen the chest. We don't wanna round forward here. So I'll turn to the side. So this is what I see a lot. We want to get into that alignment right here. So notice how the spine stays long and there's no curve, okay? Now, if the heels don't touch the floor, that's going to be the biggest problem for most students. We're going to take our blanket. We're going to just roll it up just a teeny tiny bit, probably the same height that you had it when you were seated on it. And now your students can drop their hips back a little bit and they're supported. And they can lift it as high or as low as they want. And this is gonna enable them to get into the posture and not struggle and worry so much. The other variation, if you want it to be more restorative posture, balance those sit bones on that block. Oops, as I tip over. And so maybe you're doing a meditation and you want them here for a little while, and you're really trying to get them into those hips and pelvis a little bit. Prenatal yoga classes, we might sit here for quite some time, okay? So to get into the posture, a couple variations. We're here. To get out of the pose, right, we're gonna slowly forward fold. Exhale, toes pivot forward when you do that. Inhale, exhale, we can pivot the feet, sit back down. Good, lift halfway, toes face forward. Exhale. Good, so lots of different movements there. Going for external rotation, but the inner thighs are still reaching inward, so they're still engaged, and the palms pressing into one another. We've got a nice straight line here. So again, joint stacking, wrists and elbows are in a nice line, lifting through the chest and the crown of the head. So that is, we've got two more on the forward folds. We're gonna move into cow face pose, Gomukhasana. A strap is really helpful for the upper body if you ever need it. We're gonna focus primarily on the legs. Easiest way to get into this pose, we're gonna think about downward facing dog as being our foundational pose. So think about it, if this is my foundational pose, I'm right here, I can just drop the knees and I'm on all fours, okay? So we're gonna bring the right leg forward, wrap it around, and then I'm gonna work my left toes towards the right side of my mat. That blanket can be back there or a block can be back there. I'm gonna take my booty all the way down and notice that my knees are trying to stack one on top of the other. Trying to push this sit bone down so we keep everything in alignment. And I can keep my hands on my feet to help lift and lengthen. So a deep hip opener. From here, we'll go ahead and turn to the side. From here, we're nice and tall. As we exhale, if we decide to move forward, we're gonna stay in that alignment rather than rounding in. There might be some times in a yin class where you might cue your students to curl forward, but in our alignment-based vinyasa, we're gonna move with care, right? So the variation with the arms here is we're gonna bring that right arm up and overhead, holding onto that strap for me because I've got the shoulder injury. I'm gonna take my hand down between my shoulder blades. I'm gonna roll my bicep in. I'm gonna get rid of my legs just while I teach this part. Roll the bicep in, okay? So it's a nice straight line here. Then from here, I'm gonna surf my other hand back and around, bend at the elbow and start to find my strap. Now because of my shoulder injury, I can't really go any deeper than this, but this arm usually is hugging. Back here, it's usually hugging, okay? And I'm eventually gonna walk my hands up the strap towards one another, okay? Now, sometimes you can clasp and you just grab hold. I know I can always clasp on one side, not the other, not doing it today, but that gives you that idea. So the leg that's on top, right, we're gonna go ahead and have that be the arm that's overhead. To get out of the pose, this is a really fun party trick you can teach your students. To switch sides if you want to, you're gonna walk towards the left side where the right foot is, take a little spin, keep your feet just where they are. Okay, we're gonna be right here, and then slowly continue to pivot, 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 come to all fours with the legs crossed, and then take it back down. Now this time, my left arm goes up and overhead, reaches down the spine, I surf my other arm back, lift the heart, and then hinge and fold. Inhale up, exhale, unwind, and then we release out of the posture. So that one can be a really fun one to incorporate in the class. It's a really great one if you've got a big hip class planned. And I think it's one we just don't do enough. You know, I'm guilty of it myself. All right, so our last forward fold we're gonna do, we've got two poses. It's listed as child's pose, also known as devotional, on page 70, Balasana or Bhattasana. So bhakti in Sanskrit means devotion, to celebrate, and that's, so when we think about bhakti pose and bowing, right, the arms are outstretched. Okay, child's pose traditionally, our hands are back behind us. Knees can be together apart in either posture. When we're in, there's a lot of variations for the arms. You can also, in child's pose, you can open the knees just enough to take the hands in between, and you can kind of sit back and relax right here as well. So we're gonna just take a traditional devotional pose. We call it child's pose oftentimes when we're teaching. So hips to heels, laying the spine down, walk it forward, trying to create that space. Now, if this is just too intense for you or any of your students, there's some variations. The arms can rest here at our sides. If it's a child's pose, the knees can be together apart, and we can take the arms back behind. There's a little bit more of a rounding sensation happening now, and that's simply because my belly is now resting on my thighs, and my shoulders, my torso are a little longer, so I can place that there, or bring the head all the way to the floor if that feels good. So that is our basic child's pose or devotional pose. Balasana is child, bala, and bhakti, bhakta, is our devotional pose. So we're gonna move on to our back bends next. Are we still doing okay? All right, so our back bending postures in our 200-hour training. Now remember, we're learning all of these postures because once we learn how to teach all the ins and outs of these postures, honestly, if you can teach the foundational elements of those very first structural poses and Surya Namaskar A and B, you can really learn to sequence just about any posture because you know the rules of alignment. But these ones are the ones that we want you to memorize and know inside and out so that you can just on the spot, if somebody's like, hey, teach camel pose, you're like, done, it's there. It's in your arsenal, it's in your toolbox that you create as a teacher. Okay, so back bends. We've got upward facing dog. Now we went through this one quite a bit in our tutorial on Surya Namaskar A and B. And with my shoulder injury, I've got a lot of problems, so I'm unable to do Chaturanga right now. But you have a really good tutorial on Chaturanga, and I hope you guys are all seeing a huge improvement in what you're doing. But a couple of things I want you to note in upward facing dog versus cobra. Most importantly, when we're in upward dog, I am not going to teach Chaturanga to get into it right now, but I will show you the full pose. So when we're in upward facing dog, the arms are straight. The only thing on the floor are the tops of the feet and the palms. If you're blessed with big, beautiful quads like me, sometimes your quadriceps will be on the floor too, depending on how extended that back bend is. So from here, I'm just gonna move into the pose. I'm gonna engage the legs. This is the safest way to get into it when I'm not doing chaturanga. And I'm gonna go ahead and lift up and pull here. And pull my heart up and open. Lifting, notice tops of the feet, hands. To get out of the pose, coil into the belly, push into those hands. Notice I'm putting a lot of weight in the tops of the feet. Roll evenly over the toes and press back. Okay, I'll do that again when there's not something in the way to see. So we've got our up dog. Nice strong back bend here. Now I'm not just collapsing into the posture. Everything is engaged. To get out of it, roll over and find my way back. Okay, we did a lot of work on that before. If you're gonna practice that, if you're gonna teach it, make sure you can absolutely teach in and out of the posture, working through chaturanga. I don't teach it the way that I just showed you how to get into it because most people will collapse right into it. Really important to keep everything engaged and lifted. Cobra pose, the traditional variation of cobra, we're all the way on the belly. My feet are flat, they're not curled under. So it's like, it's just like that upward facing dog. And what's really important is that all 10 toenails are on the floor, okay? They're not up like this. They're completely flat, okay? The legs are engaged, and that's what's keeping us there. Feet are hip distance or closer. They're not out here, unless it's some sort of variation that you're trying to teach specifically. The hands are always gonna be further back than you think. So oftentimes I have students with their hands right under their shoulders. We cue it that way sometimes too. And also when I say hands on their shoulders, people don't always know where their shoulders are. So the hands might be out here and their forearms might be on the floor. So we're gonna slide the hands back and get closer to that right angle position, okay? When you lift up, you're gonna lead with the back side of the heart. So you're gonna almost round the spine. Let the eyes be the last thing to lift up, okay? So notice the elbows are still bent. Your book may show a variation with the elbows straight. If the elbows can be straight, move directly into upward facing dog. It's gonna be a lot safer and we're not gonna compress the low back. So keep the elbows straight, keep the elbows bent. And then also pay attention, we don't want the elbows cut out. We wanna continue to joint stack so everything stays quote unquote narrow right next to the rib cage, okay? So as you push away, we lift the heart. There's variations that I teach a hooded cobra where we're out here with the arms, and you don't have to worry about that now. I always walk through it in class. But I want you to think about how best can I get this rounding, opening sensation. So my cobra might be here and then fold back down. And be here, fold back down, okay? So that is our cobra pose. Sechi Sarvandasana, our bridge pose. So this is a great one. I tend to start class and end class with it at times. Our bridge. I'm gonna go ahead and lay all the way back and down. We want our feet as close to the booty as possible. I wanna be nice and relaxed. I wanna hollow my belly and push my low back into the floor here. So arms are hugged into the rib cage, shoulders down the spine, palms are flat. You might even find your thumb underneath that booty a little bit. Now it's really important that I don't look left or right when I'm taking weight in my shoulders and neck because I can cause injury. So the body gets really long from the torso to the crown of the head. As I push into my feet, I want to make sure all four corners of my feet are on the floor. And I also want to make sure that my knees don't splay open and that I don't roll into the outer edges of my feet. So if you want, you can always place a block in between because a block is usually about hip distance apart when we think about it. So the feet are still in alignment with the hips, okay? So from this position right here, rather than pushing your feet away from you, what happens if you lift all 10 toes off the floor and gather that energy from the earth, that buoyancy, that prana, and we call that energy up this direction, up towards the body. So what that means is rather than pushing my heels away from me, I'm gonna engage my hamstrings and my glutes a little bit and pull the heels towards me. It's not gonna change what the pose looks like very much, but it'll be a very big difference in the sensation. It'll be a little harder, okay? So as you inhale, we're gonna exhale everything out, the hollow of the belly. Inhale, push into all four corners of the feet, peel the spine up one vertebrae at a time. Walk the shoulders down into the mat a little bit more, plant the palms. You can also clasp the hands if you want underneath. Now, notice what it's like to push your heels away. Lift all 10 toes, and now Notice what it's like if you imagine your heels trying to drag towards your shoulders. All of a sudden, there's a little bit more lift, a little bit more engagement. Okay, that's what we're looking for. If you notice that you're rolling out, bring the big toe mound to touch the earth, just like in your runner's lunge. When you're ready to come out of it, coil one vertebrae at a time as you exhale down. All right, so when we do a back bend and a forward bend, that's what we call a pose and a counter pose. So every posture has a counter pose. Back bends and twists work very well together. So if you have a sequence where you're doing a lot of back bending, aiding that twist, it's going to move the spine in another way. It's going to be really helpful for your students. With that bridge pose, there's variations with single leg. Just make sure everything stays level and alignment. Locust pose, shallow asana. So we're going to go back to our belly into that prone position. So from that prone position, we know that downward facing dog is how we get there. We've got to probably move through plank. And I haven't really talked about plank yet. We've talked about it a little bit in Surya Namaskar, but I told you in the foundational video about how we know how to get everything in alignment in downward facing dog and make sure that we always have the right measurements to operate from every time. So plank is actually the other measurement here, right? So if I can go ahead and reach the hips back and high into that down dog, I'm in alignment. That means when I roll forward, I'm gonna be in the right alignment as well too, okay? So we're gonna lower down to the mat on that exhale. And Shalabhasana, that's locust pose. Couple variations. There's some great variations in your book, so check them out. I'm gonna show you a couple. We've got a Superman variation where you can bring your arms out in front, lift everything up off the floor with you. You can also bring the arms back. You can do opposite arm, opposite leg. That's another variation. We're strengthening the back side here, okay? The other variation, which I cannot probably do today, is just lifting the legs nice and high off the ground. And what this is doing, the chin can come to the floor here, and I just can't do it with my shoulder at the moment, but lifting the thighs. So notice it's not just the feet that are lifting, it's everything, okay? So we're balancing on the pubic bone, lowest rib, are nice and long, okay? And those hip bones. So that is our locust. Let's see, we're gonna go into camel ustrasana pose. This one's one of my faves. All right. So camel pose, we're gonna go ahead and stack our hips over our knees, shoulders over hips. So I'm in alignment. I'm gonna keep those toes curled under because I like that foot dexterity. I can always flatten my feet to make it a little bit more challenging. I'm not gonna go fully into the posture. You can definitely play with your own flexibility if you want to, but we're gonna move into a symmetrical variation where the arms come up high. Exhale, both hands come around into the low back, create traction, press down, push the hips forward, lift the chest forward, and then slowly extend back, okay? If you want, you can reach for the heels. Notice how my hips came back. Hips have to go forward again. To come out of the pose, inhale up high, exhale, come down, okay? You do some asymmetrical variations where one arm comes back and you do a dancing camel, where you bring both arms alternating back and forth. So I apologize, I can't do that one. I'm really limited with this shoulder today. So camel, try different variations of that. Make sure hips stay over the knees. The first thing that's gonna usually happen is the hips come behind the knees, and then we're not really in alignment anymore because we're not joint stacked. From here, we're gonna move into bow pose, Dhanurasana. So it's a little bit of a variation of that Shalabhasana pose. We're back on our belly onto the floor. Okay, this one is great to use a strap, wrapping it around the ankles if you need it. We're gonna go ahead and slowly inhale, lift. Grab hold of those feet or the ankles. Exhale, chin back to the floor. Inhale, press the thighs away from the mat, lift the heart, okay? Exhale, lower down. A nice little windshield wiper of the legs is good to kind of release the low back after that. This pose can be really fun. Make sure your students are really warmed up for it. And we're thinking about lifting and lengthening when we get into the posture. And you're pressing the thighs up. So we're taking that same balance that we had in our locust pose and doing that in through the hips, the pubic bone, and the lowest rib cage. And we can come up pretty high in that posture as we work into it, it feels really, really nice. You want to always create that lift and elongation sensation. So you're always inhaling, creating the space. Exhale, open the back bend, reach the heart up. Alrighty. Matsyasana, we've got fish pose. This one's a really wonderful counter posture for after you've done an inversion. So say you've done some headstands, some shoulder stands, handstand class. This is gonna be a really great one to kind of finish your class off with after that part of your sequence. 2 ways to get into this. Oh, I wanna scoot back to Dhanurasana again one more time. One thing that I see in class a lot is students without the flexibility to reach for those feet at the same time. And so what they do is they tend to squeeze over here and they open their knee a little bit, and then they go over here, open their knee a little bit, and all that's done is jarred my spine. I could have possibly pulled some intercostals or like that hip flexor a little bit, maybe put some pressure on the psoas, and now all of a sudden my legs are out of alignment because my knees are wide. So if your students are not able to reach up and grab hold of those feet, encourage them that that's okay to grab that strap and stay here and centered. Or go ahead, and if you're a hands-on assister, you can go ahead and assist as well if that feels good to you and comfortable and safe. I just want to always point that out because if they're having to move, and I'll do it as if I were on the floor, if they have to reach here and then here to grab those feet, that's just throwing them out of alignment and they're working on momentum to grab rather than strength. The strength comes from here in the back bend, grabbing the feet, okay? All right, so we'll move on to fish pose from here. So 2 variations to get into it. I'll show you both. First one is Dandasana, where we're down here, legs long. And from here, I'm gonna slide my hands back, come down to my forearms. Hands are kind of underneath that booty again. Lift the chest, point the toes. From here, the angle of my arm is gonna change because I'm gonna surf my head back to the top of the mat. And I'm really supported. So rather than collapsing here, I'm pushing into the elbows and forearms, lifting the chest, okay? And then the head falls back. The head may or may not take the weight, and just pay attention to how it feels on the neck. To get out of the pose, you can sit back up or you can roll all the way back down, which is more common. Another variation to get into this pose is from that corpse pose position where we start down on the ground, bring the elbows in, and inhale, pull the chest up, take the head back. Point the toes. More variations are just lifting the legs off the floor. Other variations are right here, okay? So, not as common of poses, but again, once we learn how to use those in alignment, and as you up-level your sequences and are teaching more inversions, that's gonna be a really important posture for you. Oh, one of my favorites that was actually a pose that made me think I would never do yoga again. We're moving on to pigeon. This is gonna be our last pose for this video, okay? So pigeon is an asymmetrical back bending posture. There's a lot going on. We teach it traditionally in the forward bend position, and that's totally okay. But we're gonna learn the rules of engagement for the pose from the back bend. Sorry, my hair is just kind of all over the place. So we're gonna start in downward facing dog. I find that to be one of the most useful ways to get into the posture. So get into downward facing dog, and then from downward facing dog, we're gonna do a right leg lunge. So I'll let you move through that and focus on lifting that leg through your lunge because you know how to do that now properly. Okay, so that foot lands behind the hand. We're in our lunge. I'm gonna set that back knee down, heel toe that foot across to the opposite wrist, behind the opposite wrist. Then I'm gonna set this knee down. Now, if my flexibility doesn't permit that foot to stay so far forward, I can pull it closer to the pubic bone, and then I'm gonna lengthen that back leg out. So from the front, I go from here to here to here. Now, something really important to notice, this knee, it's either out here or it's here. It's never gonna cross inside the hip. Okay, really important to note. Also notice when we're in the back bend, the toes stay curled under. The body stays long. And you can always use blocks underneath you to help support you. The toes stay curled under here to support the sacrum and the low back because most people don't have the body awareness to check in and keep that leg engaged. In more of an up-level class, you can definitely do that. I'm gonna go ahead and switch legs. If you'd like to switch legs too, we'll go a little deeper. Okay, so you're gonna move from down dog to that runner's lunge. I'll do as I say, not as I do, right? Heel toe that foot over, make sure that knee stays on the outside of the hip, lift and lengthen. Okay, lots of variations from here. We're just worried about this one. And then if you did decide that you wanted to take it into a forward fold, As the body comes down, the hips and everything stays level. You can uncurl the toes now because the body is in a safe position to support that leg and that low back. So the toes curl in again as I rise up, and there it is. You can come back into that three-legged dog after that and stretch it out. So I hope that you learned something in your forward bends and back bends. And if you have any questions, just get a hold of me. And I look forward to talking to you soon.